This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good morning and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. It is the Sunday Social and you are live and listening to Omer Pazar, our wonderful host, and he's going to take over from me right now.
Good morning and welcome to the Sunday Social. We are here to talk about embedding practice in teaching, why and how. And I'm joined today with a fantastic Thahmina Begum, who is the executive head teacher of Forest Gate Community School, Cumberland Community School and UTCN. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. We're here to be excited about her insights in learning. So please, guys, grab a cup of coffee, sit back and join us for an enlightening discussion on teaching and learning. And remember, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions, so feel free to join us today on Teacher Talk Radio here right now. Feel free to call in. You just have to send a request if you have something that you feel like you want to talk about. Good morning, Thahmina.
Morning, Omar. Thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for joining. Can you tell us a bit about your background and experience in education, please?
So I work for Community Schools Trust and I am primarily based in Forest Gate Community School, but I do oversee, currently I'm an exec head overseeing Forest Gate, Cumberland Community School and UTCN. Before this role, I was head teacher of Forest Gate Community School from about 2019, just before that pandemic hit. And before that, I had various roles within Forest Gate Community School that included head of English, assistant head teacher, deputy head in charge of professional development, teaching and learning, appraisals, all of those things. And I am an English teacher by trade.
Okay. Obviously, we're from very different disciplines. I'm a pure science person here. If you had to choose an animal to best represent your teaching style, this is a bit of a weird question here. What would it be and why?
Ready. An animal to best represent my teaching style, Omar, did you say?
Yes.
You put me on the spot there. I have no idea. I mean, I can tell you all the animals that have disrupted my teaching over the years.
All right, let me ask you a bit of a different question, just to get to know you a little bit. What's your favorite activity to do outside of school?
I like watching good movies, a good theatre show every so often. I mean, I sound really boring and it's something that everybody does, I guess, but I do like to eat nice food outside, you know. I used to, this makes me sound more interesting, but I stopped and maybe I'll start again. I used to weight train. So that was quite good.
Oh wow, that's actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
I don't actually like movies, so I think I'm a bit more boring than you, to be honest. I just can't sit down in the cinema. I just find it a really pointless activity. But that's just me. But I don't mind theatre though. I think that's quite interesting.
Good.
So let's get on to the topic today. We're here to talk about teaching and learning and all that exciting stuff. And obviously you come with you're like an encyclopedia almost. You come with a wealth of knowledge. So my first question to you is, what are the key elements in a school environment that can lead to an improvement in teaching quality?
The key elements in the school environment. Well, I think you need a body of knowledge that includes domain-specific knowledge. It needs the right culture, but when I talk about culture, I mean people doing the right things so that the culture prevails. The right culture prevails. You need a shared language around what you want to achieve as a school, and you need the right people, the key stakeholders to be aligned in the vision. So what I found is sometimes in some schools, teaching and learning might sit with the person in charge of teaching and learning, like the lead, the assistant head or the deputy head in charge of teaching and learning, and it's regarded as their thing, and it's not necessarily echoed or shared by the head teacher or overtly shared by them. And I think that dampens or impedes spreading that right culture across the school. I think it's such an important part of establishing or raising standards in a school. It should be up there with something like safeguarding, which we know is extremely important. But I think it's equivalent to that, because both are absolutely crucial in achieving the right outcomes for our students. I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, that was a fantastic answer. I do want to, Paul, you mentioned domain-specific knowledge. Where does this knowledge come from? Like, so let's say you're in charge of teaching and learning. How do you know that the knowledge that you've selected in terms of what the teachers need to know, how do you know that it's the best knowledge and it's going to provide the best teaching quality in your schools?
It's a good question, because that knowledge appears to change over the years, doesn't it? We go for a kind of best bets approach, I guess, and being attuned to the best available evidence at that time. And I think that's as far as we can go. That's the best we can do. Evidence is constantly changing. You know, once upon a time, many of us in the audience and beyond will remember certain practices in our teaching that was extremely popular and backed by evidence, and then it transpired it was completely wrong and bogus. And I talk about things like, you know, learning styles, etc. But we talk about being evidence informed, being attuned to the changing evidence or it shifting, and staying attuned to that, really. So in our school, we've got, you know, lots of schools base their teaching strategies on the likes of Rosenshine, Hattie. You know, we look at the work of Dylan William, Doug Lemov, and those kind of people, because at the moment, the evidence suggests that those are the best teaching strategies that allow the best outcomes for our students. But it's important to stay attuned to that.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, side note here, but Dylan William was actually like Inside the Black Box was like the first book that I read that like really kind of changed my practice and really I felt like it really moved me forward. Is there any practices that you've used and you've now you look in hindsight and you're like, I can't even believe that I even did that. Like, I can't believe I wasted my time doing that type of practice at the time.
Oh, Omar, if I listed all the things I used to do, it would make me look really bad. So I say this with caution. But what I'm going to put out there is I don't do them anymore, okay? I promise I'm a better person for it and a teacher for it. But just linked to what you said, the Inside the Black Box books was my first book that I was given by my mentor, and he said to return it to him, and I never did because I really liked it that much. Despite that, and that was early on when I was a trainee, I did all sorts. So I did the group work carousel thing where I had to, I was really good at PowerPoint animations, right, when in my training year. And I was obsessed with it. So I'd stay up for hours playing around with transitions, sound clips. I used to do timers on animation. So I taught Holes, a book in English. And if I set a task for, I don't know, 5 minutes, I would have the lizard, which is a feature in the book, move across the screen, and it would take 5 minutes to move across the screen. And I would take the time to explain this to my class. Guys, when the lizard reaches the end of the screen, that's when your task finishes. I thought it was well clever. And my students would watch the lizard for another 30 seconds or so, debating whether it's moving or not. Think about how many seconds and minutes cumulatively lost because of a stupid thing like that. I mean, I had a lot of fun with it, but I think I missed out on a lot of learning over the years because of it. So that was one example. I used to do like thought tunnels. I don't know if you've heard of that, Omar. Thought tunnels.
No, I've not heard of that.
So I'd get the class up and I would make them stand in 2 rows facing each other and then join arms. And then one person would have to walk through that tunnel and shout out their thoughts as a character. So, they were kind of understanding characterization and things like that. Again, it was really like, it was a cool activity in my mind. But I don't know how much learning was done in that and by how many. So those are 2 examples. I mean, there are loads more, but I fear my credibility if I carry on listing them. But of course, over time, I've learned that there are much quicker or faster ways of getting that knowledge across to all my students, as opposed to 1 or 2. And probably I've, sped up the time it took me to plan those activities as well in doing so.
Yeah, I do think that there's, I mean, Pets McRae talks about in lean, is it lean lesson planning?
Yeah.
He talks about, when you're setting a task out, you want to make sure that how much time you put in, how much you're getting out of that. And sometimes, like, I think even in that book, he mentions that there was this lesson that he used to do where he used to like play music at different times or something, and it was just, whilst on the surface it was a really fun activity, it took him really long to plan, like much longer than all the other lessons to plan. And actually, when you look at what the students actually gained out of it, it wasn't really like worth his time if he just kind of stripped it down to the basics and
Yeah.
just focused on the learning at heart. I just do want to take a second to say that Edexcels' new student-centered French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs caters to the needs of all learners regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying, rooted in learned language knowledge. Their assessments are transparent, accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills through inclusive and relatable content. Okay, so I'm just going to you've mentioned that obviously in a school you need to have the right type of culture, you need to have a shared language, aligned vision, and it needs to be echoed through the whole school, not just through the person that's in charge of teaching and learning.
Yeah.
How do you actually go about that? Because that sounds like a really, really heavy task. So how do you go about implementing that?
I mean, yeah, it's a comprehensive kind of thought process at all levels, I guess. But I would start off, especially if you're in a position to affect change or affect things from a structural point of view, and those who are leading, that usually they sit in a leadership position in the school and have close proximity to the head. If you can affect things on a structural basis, the other things that you want to achieve, whole school, is a lot easier. So I'll give you an example. So I was, I was very lucky to be able to lead teaching and learning, which the head teacher echoed at the time. So, Charlotte Whelan was the head when I was a deputy head. Before Charlotte, it was Simon Elliott, and they very much believed in the vision. And what they did was they agreed with structural changes that I suggested, or we came up together. So one of the things that we did, particularly in the last 3 years, actually, so when I was in charge of Forest Gate, we moved twilights, which was about 3 hours on a Friday afternoon, once a half term. And I know lots of schools have this model. 3 hours or 2 hours on a Friday afternoon after school, once a half term. Everybody wants to go home. They want the weekend to come. And then they come back on Monday having forgotten or going back to their, normal routines in the classroom. So what I thought was, actually, learning doesn't all happen like that. We know that. We apply it to our students. Why don't we apply it to ourselves? So what we did was we moved away from those kind of traditional insets or twilights, and we disaggregated that time so that we had short, sharp, frequent CPD sessions throughout the half term. So we have them now on a Tuesday afternoon every other week for about half an hour. No one minds sitting for about half an hour. We base each session on a very specific strategy that is based on our evidence-informed framework that everybody is aware of and has agreed to. And that half an hour goes really fast because we talk about what that strategy is. It's very focused. We look at what a good one looks like. So, we're creating those mental models of good. We discuss high frequency errors because we're normalizing the fact that, hey, we're all capable of falling into those errors because that's just the way our jobs are. But also it makes us more conscious of not committing them. And the last 15 minutes, we get up and we practice that specific strategy that we've talked about. So it's a safe space. There's rehearsal there, which is a key mechanism of an effect of what makes good professional development programs, according to the EEF. And then we go away and we do it in the classroom. And so on a structural level, that's quite important. So I always say, if you can affect things on a structural level, it means that you allow more time to focus your energy and your attention as a school and as stakeholders in the school on the right stuff. So one of the other things that we did on a structural level as well is, re-looked at the meetings that we have across our schools. Are they all really, really important? Are some meetings easily done in a bulletin where you're communicating kind of admin bureaucratic things? Can we realign some meetings to be more teaching and learning focused instead of disseminating information? I've got rid of kind of performance appraisals in our schools. Again, that took up time, that took up energy. There were certain pressure points linked to performance appraisals, formal lesson observations linked to those things as well. Again, all things that took people's attention, time and energy away from thinking hard about their craft in the classroom. And we were nervous about that one as a school, getting rid of PMR. Because, again, it's a traditionally very important, high stakes structural thing. However, what we did was we thought hard about the rest of the systems that are in place to maintain the standards in the classroom. And we found after a year of not having PMR, the sky didn't fall down. So it was a good move. So I mentioned on a structural level, disaggregating twilight so that they're not 2 hour long once a half term, but short, sharp, frequent half an hour slots.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson Edexcels' new student-centered French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson Edexcel MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports on the lack of suitable childcare for children with special educational needs and disabilities, particularly over school holidays. The report features data from the charity Quorum, which shows that only 1 in 20 councils in England say there is enough childcare for SEND children during school holidays. In some areas, including London and Yorkshire, there were no councils with sufficient childcare available. Parents of children with SEND say that in some cases, they are unable to work because of the lack of suitable childcare in holiday periods. Others express concern at the significant change in routines brought about by having to spend the whole summer at home with parents. Quorum conducted similar surveys in Scotland, where no councils reported having enough childcare for children with SEND. Similarly, in Wales, there was a lack of adequate provision, with only 5% of councils saying they had enough suitable places. In a different survey by Contact and the Disabled Children's Partnership, covering 1,800 parents of children with SEND, 9 out of 10 said they were not able to find a suitable holiday club or activity. While there is a legal duty in England for local authorities to make sure there is sufficient childcare available for parents who want to work, up to 14 years and extended to 18 years for parents of disabled children, it does not have to be paid for by the local authority. This means even where childcare can be found, the costs can be prohibitive. A spokesperson for the Department of Education said the government is investing £300 million to test new approaches to short respite breaks, and that holiday activities in its food programme help children from low-income families over the holidays. The Guardian has focused on plans to limit the number of students taking low-value degrees in England, a measure the paper says is most likely to hit working-class, Black, Asian and minority ethnic applicants. Courses that do not have a high proportion of graduates getting a professional job, going on to postgraduate study, or starting a business will be capped. Vice-Chancellors say the measure could act as a red flag, putting off students who may feel the course will damage their life chances. The numbers cap is unlikely to affect the bulk of courses offered by Oxbridge or Russell Group universities. The government appears to have moved away from applying minimum entry requirements for school leavers, which had been floated as a way to control student numbers. The changes are unlikely to help improve the financial position of English universities either. They have seen tuition fees frozen at £9,250 per student since 2017. Inflation has eroded the value of fees, and many institutions say they now lose money for every UK student. Schools Week reported on the release of SATS results, focusing on the repeat problem faced by many head teachers, actually getting access to them. This was despite government promises that the previous issues had been ironed out. Multiple error messages appeared, and when many tried to access the primary assessment gateway, they got messages which included one saying that the system was currently unavailable due to planned maintenance. Last year, schools faced issues with late results, lost scripts and an unanswered helpline, but a lessons learned review in April said robust tests had made sure similar events would not happen this year. Schools Week has previously reported on technical issues which delayed marking by a week, and complaints that pay rates had gone down again. Capita has a £107 million contract to deliver the assessments in a 7-year deal which began last year. Meanwhile, other media outlets focused on the attainment results themselves, which show that it remains significantly lower than before COVID and that they've changed little since last year. The proportion of 10 and 11-year-olds meeting the government's expected standards in reading, writing and maths combined remained at 59%, the same as in 2022, down from 65% in 2019. Results in reading were down to 73% from 75% in 2022, but this year's paper triggered mass complaints from parents and teachers, saying it had left some pupils in tears. This year's cohort had the majority of Year 3 and Year 4 disrupted by the pandemic. Finally, Sky News broadcast a wide-ranging interview with Education Secretary Gillian Keegan. One of the topics covered was absent pupils, with Ms Keegan saying that absence levels were now a crisis. She went on to say that she would pick them up myself when asked the best way to tackle the issue. When questioned as to whether collecting pupils was a good use of school leaders' time, she said, "They do have a duty. We all have to play our part. Sometimes you have to go to the home." However, a spokesperson for Number 10 did not repeat Ms Keegan's comments, but did state different schools will take different approaches. Ms Keegan's comments have been met with derision from many teachers who took to social media to point out that it was just one more thing teachers and school leaders were being asked to do. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm addressing a problem quite a few teachers have, the dreaded lock screen in the middle of a lesson. We have all experienced it when you're displaying something and the computer decides you're inactive and goes to sleep. I notice this most if you're using Digital Ink instead of a whiteboard. Well, I may have a way to stop this happening to you. However, it will depend on your school's network settings. You might not be allowed to change the options I'm about to discuss. A quick workaround for this is to see if your display has a freeze button. This will hold whatever's being shown until you unfreeze. Lock screen happens because your computer is trying to save power and also to keep you safe by locking after a specified time of inactivity. If you're going AFK and leaving your computer unattended, press Windows and L. This will lock your machine. Even if this next tip isn't working for you, this will. Never leave your computer unattended and logged in. Windows and L is a good habit to start. Now you can lock your machine at will. You're ready to change the settings to keep it on. We need to go to the display settings. A quick way is to right click on the desktop and select it from the menu. Now select power and sleep. As you're probably always plugged in when teaching, set the two drop down menus under the heading screen and sleep to never when plugged in. Now your screen won't switch off and the machine won't go to sleep to save power when you're plugged in. Remember, you will need to manually lock the computer if walking away. I'm Steve Woods and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Yeah, so I talked about kind of affecting things on a structural level if you're in the privileged position to do so, so that we can realign our efforts and our focus on all things teaching and learning and thinking hard about our craft in the classroom. So I mentioned disaggregating twilight time, realigning or reducing meetings that can be made into other things, and looking at other aspects like PMRs, which are high effort, low impact, if you can affect change in that way.
You said something and it really struck a chord with me because I was literally thinking the same thing like 5 weeks ago or something like this. Like, when it comes to education, when it comes to how people learn, like a lot of teachers are basically experts in this. Like, we know how people learn, but it's really weird because when it comes to CPD, is like, or even on a personal level, like when it comes to your own CPD in terms of how you want to like research and find out more about education, is like we don't follow the same steps. Like, we know how people learn, but we don't follow the same steps. So in a traditional kind of inset day, it is a long, like 3-hour-long session. And it's just someone talking to you, and we know that isn't the best way for people to learn. Like, if you're teaching a classroom, you wouldn't do it in the same style. But my question to you is, how do you? So you said that you have short, sharp, frequent kind of sessions and you try and focus it on teaching and learning. How do you judge the success of this, and how frequent is this?
Yeah, so that's a good question. How do I judge the success of it? I judge the success of any CPD session in the practice that I see afterwards. So I always, and that's really hard to achieve, right? And in my years of kind of being in charge of CPD, and other people who are in charge of CPD will attest to this, they often kind of hold their heads in frustration, wring their hands when they see that, they've done this great session, everyone's really positive about it, they've got involved, they really enjoyed it. And then the next day they go into classrooms and they don't see what they've just had a whole session on practicing. And they're kind of, they're frustrated. Why aren't they doing it? Why aren't teachers doing this? Why we spent ages on this. We gave training. We provided support. We sent it out. What's happening? And it's a fair thing, right? I can see the frustration. But actually, it's the idea of embedding practice. It's number one, it's one of the key mechanisms that I mentioned from that report from Education Endowment Foundation, where they look at what makes effective professional development. So they talk about kind of building knowledge, managing the cognitive load, revisiting prior learning, which is what you just mentioned, Omar. Like we learn like students learn. It's in the science of learning isn't specific to young people. We all learn like them, and so we should think about how we're disseminating that knowledge, not in 3-hour sessions, but in the way that we will learn. The other mechanism they talk about is motivating staff. So thinking about setting and agreeing goals, providing information from a credible source. That's why we've got an evidence-informed framework. We should look at what the evidence suggests. The third mechanism that I talk about is developing teaching techniques. So thinking about kind of your instruction, your modelling, the rehearsal that I mentioned, the social support. That's why we sit in teams and we practice together. And the last one, which in my opinion is the hardest one to achieve, which links to your question, Omar, is embedding practice. How do we move from what we receive in training to what we're actually doing? And in the report, they talk about how to embed practice, providing prompts and cues, action planning, thinking about how you monitor, and prompting context-specific repetition. So I look at that in the context of, your subject specialism. And I always say, and I think about myself, the success of my CPD is what I see in the classroom. If I'm not seeing it in the classroom, I've not been successful. I could have done an amazing PowerPoint and been really energetic on stage, but that's nothing if I don't see change in the classroom. However, we can't expect to see that immediately. What we need to think about is, okay, what are all the different things that you can do to embed that practice? It is not good enough just to deliver a session. What's your follow through? What midweek nudge are you going to send out? What great practice are you going to capture really quickly to secure success early and often, which is one of the levers of motivation that Peps McRae talks about. What's your monitoring like? Are you going to pick up on something that's not gone quite right later on after someone's embedded that into their practice? Or are you going to be really quick and quietly pick that up and provide the support that's needed? And that can't be done by one person. It's got to be done by a core team of people who can help you embed practice in those different ways.
Okay, I just want to mention here that we have quite a few listeners. If you do want to join the conversation, feel free to send a request and we can open the mic for you. You said that you changed the school on a structural basis and then everything kind of fell into place. Why might other schools not have the power to do this, or why might they not be doing this?
Well, I think they are, the only thing that I can guess there is, different things. What I mentioned earlier, if your head or your leadership aren't aligned with this vision of teaching and learning and affecting change in the classroom and your craft, they're not aligned with that in a meaningful way, meaning they're prepared to change things that aren't quite working or could be better, then it might be difficult. So if in my experience, I was able to move Twilights to disaggregate them over time because those above me agreed with it or said, hey, Thahmina, you know what, it could be a really good idea. Let's try it and see how it works. But I guess that won't happen if those who can support you affecting change like that can't see that or are afraid to make those changes. Having said that, though, it's not impossible to affect change on a classroom level if you don't do those things structurally, but it will be harder.
Thank you for that. I just want to just say that Edexcels new student-centered French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying, rooted in learned language knowledge. Their assessments are transparent, accessible, rooted in learned language knowledge, accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills through inclusive and reliable content. I did want to pull back on something that you said. You mentioned shared language. Why is shared language important in teaching and learning, and how does it contribute to the quality of teaching?
It's an interesting one. Shared language is important, right? Because I'll give you an example. If I said something like, I was giving feedback, right, to your lesson, Omar, and I said, Omar, if you, and it was a really great lesson as it is. One thing that I noticed was if when you gave that instruction, next time, make sure that you tell the students how to do that task. Meaning, did you want it in silence? Did you want it in groups, in pairs? And you need to tell them how long to do that task for, because those things weren't clear, right? That took me about 15 seconds to tell you that bit of feedback. But if I just said to you, Omar, when you did that task, you needed to make your means of participation clearer. In a school where everybody understands what means of participation means, which is how you do a task, so how long it takes, the condition, what the task actually is, you know it immediately, you understand it. So I took means of participation. It's a term from Teach Like a Champion, but what it means is, number one, it speeds up what you're trying to say. When you say something, those who share that language know exactly what is expected of them. They know what it means. It takes far fewer seconds. But secondly, because it's a shared language and we all understand what it means, there's a sense of in-group. You know, it's the language we use in our organization. We know what we're talking about. And that kind of in-group idea links to, you know, ideas about belonging and motivation, which links to that as well. So I think that's quite important. Motivation, belonging, and all of those things link to well-being. And actually, when we're talking about our craft in the classroom and what we do as teachers, what is the thing that we love doing above all else is being teachers, you know, being with our students in the classroom. And so all of those things for me are really intertwined, and there are key levers in that we can pull to affect the right things.
Thank you for that again. Now, you have a huge, let's say, I mean, in your case, you have 3 schools that you're currently overseeing, and obviously that contains not only a numerous amount of staff, but also a numerous amounts of students as well. So you mentioned motivation. I think it's got to play a huge role in this, right? Because you have a whole body of people that need to be motivated to do what you're essentially asking them to do. So my question is, how does motivation factor into quality teaching, and what are some effective ways to motivate both the students and the staff in a school?
What was the first question, Omar? Sorry, I wasn't listening like a bad student.
I didn't check for understanding. How does motivation factor into quality teaching is the first part of that question.
Right, so if I start off with the mechanism of motivating staff that I mentioned earlier from the EEF. So they say, you know, setting and agreeing goals. The evidence suggests if you can set a goal that is linked to time and location, you are twice as more likely to achieve the thing that you set out to do. It's probably why the majority of us don't achieve our New Year's resolutions. We talk about it, but we don't really peg it to time and location. They talk about presenting information from a credible source. So I mentioned, you know, the evidence-informed framework or ideas from credible sources like that. And they talk about providing affirmation and reinforcement after progress. So do we capture people doing the right thing fast and share that and therefore reinforce that? Or do we let people get on with it and, you know, it kind of die in the ether because no one really notices what's going on? And actually, one of the levers of motivation, securing success early and often, that I mentioned earlier, really looks into this idea of, okay, you know, in the classroom, when a student does something good and expected of them, or they really try, we should acknowledge it, right? We should notice it quite quickly. We should provide praise, and when we do that, they're thinking, "Hey, I've been recognized for this. That feels good. I'm going to do it again." But as adults, it kind of works the same way. So if I've really tried hard on perfecting my cold call, and I'm someone who's really got into the habit of kind of picking a student first and then asking a question, or asking a question and allowing no wait time or think time, And after a CPD session, that has taught me, you know what, Thahmina, you've got into a bad habit. This is actually how you're meant to do it. Question first, provide that thinking time, and then pick a student. And I have intervened in my bad habit, and I've made an effort, and actually my cold call is much better. I'd love for someone to notice that. Even though I'm not doing it for the recognition, actually we all like that. We all like that recognition. And so what kind of mechanisms do we have in place in our schools that facilitate capturing those things to support the motivation of staff? So across our schools, we've got teaching and learning teams, which comprise of essentially your very enthusiastic staff who are very passionate about teaching and learning. We call them hype men because we're really cool like that. But basically, these are staff members in the school who are kind of naturally very passionate about teaching and learning. They get together, they talk about, what makes great teaching. We have weekly sessions with them, but they're critically thinking about what's going on, how to unpick it, and how can we further embed that practice where it's not being embedded properly. But what they do, which serves that kind of motivation lever, is they go out and then they capture the good stuff in their own kind of remit. So I've got someone from every subject, if you like, from every level. So they're not just kind of middle leaders or senior leaders. You've got your trainees in this team. You've got your main pay scale teachers. You've got middle leaders. You've got senior leaders. And that's really important. And actually, it's quite specifically done. So when you're assembling your hype men, your teaching and learning team influencers, you've got to think about who they are. Usually they're your early adopters, the people who are naturally quite excited about perfecting your craft in the classroom and all of that. But again, who are your winnable veteran teachers? Those ones who traditionally sit at the back of a hall in a CPD with their arms folded, rolling their eyes, saying, "Here we go again." Can you win them over? Because usually they're the ones who are quite good, in the classroom. They've also seen it all before. They bring a lot of value to the table, but they're cynical, and they need the right person or people to win them over, to say to them, "Hey, you've got a lot to add here. You're very influential, and we can learn from your practice." Who are they? Can you win them? Who naturally gets excited about teaching and learning? These are your champions that you need to assemble. And when you do, what you've suddenly got is a team who can go out and among their own teams capture the good stuff, the people who are perfecting their practice and deserve that recognition. And when they do, they need to share it. Not wait until the next CPD session, not wait until the next twilight, which is a half a term later. They need to capture it in the moment there and then. So we've got a good culture of kind of those team members and their colleagues capturing short snippet video examples of a really good cold call or really great example of intellectual preparation, backwards planning for a lesson, or whatever it is that we've just had a session on whole school and on a department level, and they share it on a WhatsApp group that we have. So I've got the pleasure and privilege of being a part of 5 WhatsApp groups, teaching and learning WhatsApp groups across our 5 schools. And all day long, I'm seeing just incoming short snippet videos of amazing efforts for perfecting our craft in the classroom. And that is infectious because someone else sees it and think, "Oh, isn't that great? So-and-so is being recognized." You feel really happy for them. But then you're also thinking, "Hey, science are getting a lot of praise here. I want English to get the same. So I'll go away and look out for really great English practice based on a session that we've just had as a school. And then I'll capture that and I'll share that." And it grows and continues. So building a team of your hype men, getting them to capture the good stuff early and often serves as motivation for teachers across. And that kind of celebrating is very successful. On the other side of that, for me and for anyone leading teaching and learning, that kind of content is very good data for you to pick up on things that aren't going quite right, so that you can use that to inform your next bit of CPD or your next kind of focus for perfecting in terms of craft in the classroom. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite interesting, the references that you made to kind of the classroom, because I do think there's quite a lot of parallels, like between how you run your classroom and how it works in the classroom to how it could work on a whole school kind of level. You've mentioned Teach Like a Champion, and obviously there's so many routines that you can embed across the school level to make sure that all the teachers are kind of doing the same type, have the same type of routines, and in motivating staff, one of the aspects that leads to motivation is actually people feeling, good at something. It actually does play a huge role in people being motivated. If they feel like, okay, yeah, I can actually do this, that does create an intrinsic motivation to keep at it. My question is, when you've got loads of routines, we know you don't chuck loads of routines to a classroom, let's say, in one go. And obviously you wouldn't do that in your teaching and learning strategy, but do you think it might be difficult for new members of staff that might be joining a school that has so many different teaching and learning strategies and so many different things that they need to pick up on? Do you think this might be something that could be more difficult for them to be motivated, and is there a system to kind of get them up to speed fast with the rest of the staff that are already there?
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting you say that, Omar. In my experience, right, new staff who've joined, I'm acutely conscious of how many things that people have to pick up when they join our schools, in our trust. There's a lot. I get that. Interestingly, in my experience, new staff members are the best at picking up the routines and the expectations we have in the classroom faster than some of us more veteran people who've been here forever. And it kind of makes sense because it's new for them, and so they're very, very conscious about perfecting that and achieving that over time. We've got a playbook, a teaching and learning playbook, which we've kind of built and crafted over time. It includes the evidence-informed framework that I mentioned. So straight away for them, that's their kind of pegging point. They know that's what they need to refer to. And then we've broken down that playbook and that framework into plays, if you like. So high leverage teaching and learning plays, or things that they need to master in their practice. So I took kind of inspiration from the walkthrough series and other things that I've seen. And they're 5-step walkthroughs of how to do a particular thing. So, for example, the entry into lesson, that's a play. There's 5 steps to do that really, really well. And those 5 steps are granular. They're very, very specific or concrete in nature. They're pegged to a high frequency error we often make. So, for example, we stand at threshold, the door, when we greet students and say good morning to them. The high frequency error we might make as a teacher is we don't stand at the threshold because we're busy loading up our PowerPoint at the front of the classroom, hidden behind a computer. And so I've kind of designed it based on high frequency errors, the opposite of that, what that looks like. And it has to be really concrete. So it means someone who is kind of trying to master that play can coach themselves, so they can identify for themselves, oh yeah, that's the step that I missed this time that I did it. I'm going to really focus on that next time. But it also facilitates coaching of others. So if I'm an instructional coach for someone else, it makes my feedback to them really meaningful and achievable because I'm basing it on those steps in those plays that I mentioned. So yeah, it's a lot. But what I've tried to do, and I think what is a sensible approach, is look at your kind of high leverage basic routines, whether that's behavioral routines or instructional routines. If you can focus on those when you begin, you're doing kind of 50% of the work, because most other things will come together or be put in place if you master those kind of basics of a classroom. I cannot think about domain specific, like subject knowledge, the how well my explanation is, or how good my live model is, if I am having to think about that child who's speaking in the front, or that kid at the back who's thrown a chair at the other one. And so mastering those kind of basic level behavioral instructional routines is really important.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Although throwing a chair across the class is quite extreme. I think no one could concentrate in that type of
Yeah.
environment. We have Fabian Daruk, who's made a comment in the chat. Guys, feel free to make comments if you if there's something that you wish to add. Also, you can always request to join as a speaker. It says it's actually addressed to you, Thahmina, and it says, I heard your points raised. I agree that if we are leading CPD and the audience returns to existing or negative habits, it indicates the effectiveness of our CPD. We must be honest with ourselves by following up on how our CPD is used afterwards. So he's very much in agreement there. And I do have to say that I think, again, it's akin to when you check for understanding as a teacher as well. If I'm a teacher, I need to check for understanding to make sure that the students have understood what I've just said. And in the same regard, if you're running CPD across a whole school, and you need to check, have they actually understood by seeing it in practice, in person. You've mentioned that you have a playbook, and I think essentially what you're saying is it kind of follows a hub model of leadership, which is where there's one kind of thing that everyone can follow and refer to, and it doesn't lead to a broken kind. Like if you follow a linear model, one person says, and by the time it goes all the way down to the teachers from the person at the very top, it kind of is a completely different message.
Yeah.
To
I mean,
it
yeah,
was
it
originally.
standardizes quality. Like, I don't want to go back to the days where someone gives you feedback, right, based on something that they've seen in your classroom, but it's you listen to that feedback and you think, where has that come from? It's not based on anything. Who are you? You question their credibility. You can totally tell that this person is in a bad mood, or they don't like you, or those all kind of that used to exist back in the day, didn't it? And it depended on who it was, what time of day it was, what part of the week it was, whether it was mock season, all of those things. And actually, if you can realign that and make sure that feedback is meaningful, and the only way to make it meaningful is make it objectively linked to evidence and a shared framework that everybody has agreed to and invested in, you are standardizing a level of quality that everyone deserves.
Yeah, 100%. Now, obviously, we've been looking at stuff as a whole kind of school, and in this particular case, a multiple school kind of mindset. But obviously, in one school, there's different subjects, and these need very specific kind of CPD, subject-specific CPD. So, what role does a department CPD play in let's say meetings or in your teaching and learning team, and how does it contribute to the professional development of the teaching staff?
So it's a really important factor. The best kind of CPD is when it is subject specific. And we've kind of, the trust has been on a bit of a journey with that. So, a good few years ago, we did start off with an evidence-informed lesson framework that allowed there to be a kind of a real shared language. Everybody knew what we were talking about when we said certain things. We very much used techniques or strategies from Teach Like a Champion. It was just easier, people understood what we were talking about when we said certain terms. It allowed us, as a result, to focus on what I mentioned before, bagging those basics, those behavioural and instructional routines, getting our entry, our exits right, being seen, looking, standardising the time it took to do things like turn and talk and paying attention and all of those things. What that meant was, once we'd mastered that, and by the way, we haven't mastered it, it's an ongoing process, but once we'd got really used to that and it was an embedded part of our practice, it freed up time for us to think really hard, therefore, about our subject and how we can improve our subject knowledge and our delivery of that subject knowledge. Like I mentioned before, if my class are coming into my classroom screaming and shouting, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes at the start of a lesson sorting that out, when actually, in an ideal world, I want to spend the first 10 minutes focusing on some kind of memory retrieval, which is linked to my curriculum. So we had to, it's a journey. So we had to kind of bag those basics first, really support and embed those routines that minimize the what of the how of learning and maximize the what of learning, which is our subject. And so now what we're really focusing on, and we've done it for the last couple of years, is intellectual preparation, which is basically thinking hard about our lesson delivery in a subject-specific context. So we've had the model of whole school CPD, where I mentioned we focus on a strategy, we get up and we practice it, etc. But those sessions are then followed by a department meeting. So in that department meeting, that whole school strategy will be re-looked at in a subject-specific context. And the head of department would lead that. So that empowers our middle leaders, those who are driving our curriculum and our outcomes for our students, and their leverage that they have over their departments and their teams. We've kind of notched it up a bit with this idea of intellectual preparation, where we take one very specific aspect of our curriculum, something that is traditionally really hard to teach, or we notice a lot of high frequency errors in that subject. So for example, in English, we've noticed that English teachers have really different ways of unpicking a key quotation, or in a large team with varying levels of expertise and experience, English teachers for a given topic might pick quotes that might not be the highest leverage quote to pick for something that they're meant to teach. If we want to align that, intellectual preparation session is a really good forum to do that. Because what I'll do if I was leading that session is pick the best quote or best thing that I know traditionally could be aligned better, and then I would teach the team how to deliver that thing. In science, Omar, what is traditionally a really difficult topic to teach in science?
Oh, you put me on the spot there. I think it does depend on the subject specialism of the person. Like, I might particularly find equilibrium quite a difficult, with Le Chatelier's principle, quite a difficult lesson to teach, because I'm not actually a chemist. But someone else might find, for example, conservation of momentum quite a difficult concept to teach, if they're not a physicist, for example. Right. But even actually as a physicist, that is quite a difficult topic to teach.
Great.
Actually.
So you've picked two there that actually, when I've spoken to scientists before, they've mentioned those things. Another one they've mentioned is electrolysis. Traditionally, like a HOD would know, right? A subject specialist will know. In my experience, these are the things that are really difficult to teach, or we get it wrong, or it's too varied. An IP, intellectual prep session, is a fantastic forum to align that practice and teach my teachers how to teach that thing really, really well. And in doing that, what you're doing is you are delivering subject-specific CPD, and you're making that playbook that I mentioned much, much more meaningful, because you're skilling up your teachers within their domain. And all of those things combined hit the components of expert knowledge that Peps McRae mentions in his latest book, Developing Expert Teaching. That's my third reference to him. Can you tell I'm a fan?
Yeah. Now, actually, when it comes to, for example, subject-specific CPD in science, I know there's like a lot of kind of things. It's like often people say science teachers talk a lot. They add a lot of extra facts in, and that kind of comes under the redundancy effect. I mean, who said science teachers like to talk a lot? I don't think I like to talk a lot, although I host this show, so probably I do actually like to talk a lot. And actually, one really big thing that often science teachers do poorly, I would say, is they love to just chuck a huge definition on the board without breaking it down prior to kind of that definition. And then students are like, it's like me saying randomly, learn this random word in this random language, and let's say, for example, Turkish or Greek. I said, learn this random word, learn the whole definition. Okay, what is it? What does it mean? It's like it's difficult, and I think it is very important to have subject specific CPD for that particular reason. You've mentioned the term intellectual prep, and just for those people that are listening, there might be a few people that don't actually know what that means. Could you just tell us what that term actually means?
Yeah, so I took it from someone. I can't remember who I took it from. And most of the things that we do, I've stolen it from somewhere. But essentially, it means thinking hard about your lesson delivery in a subject-specific context. So, kind of a general technique, it might be cold call, okay? If I was to make that subject specific, I would peg it to a particular topic that I would teach in English literature for a year 10 lesson, and I would link it to a checking for understanding aspect of my lesson that I've identified, and only a subject expert would be able to identify that would be meaningful to their knowledge in that lesson. So basically making those whole school routines and strategies subject specific, but how you would deliver that in a subject specific context.
Okay. I just want to. So let's say, in terms of your teaching and learning kind of strategy across the whole school that you might try to embed, is there like a core kind of knowledge that you identify that this is kind of what your curriculum should kind of entail? And is there like something that you kind of think, okay, this is what I'm focusing on, or this is kind of the core knowledge behind what we do?
What do you mean in terms of the CPD program?
Yes.
It depends, right, on the school and the context of that school. So like it's fascinating for me working across different schools, because they're at different points in their journey. Forest Gate Community School, it's a very established school. It's top 50 in the country for progress for the last 6 years, number 1 in the borough, outcomes of +1, more than +1. My approach with that school will be really different to a school like Cumberland a couple of years ago, which was, it went from RI to good recently, but it was the outcomes weren't as good. Now it's gone from minus pre-pandemic to 0.6 in the last year, which is fantastic. So, but they are on a huge trajectory improvement journey, and I couldn't lift the approach or the strategies that I had for Forest Gate and apply it blanket to Cumberland. And again, that's really important, and it's listed in the EEF's report on effective professional development. We need to think about with care, taking into consideration the context and the needs of the school. So where I could like throw in a far more complex routines and expectations of teacher behaviours in the classrooms at Forest Gate, I needed to strip it back when we first introduced this at Cumberland and think about basics, achieving the basics of behavioural routines and instructional routines in the classroom. So I'll give you an example. I could jump straight into kind of the nuances of live modelling at Forest Gate, because I knew that the prerequisites were there. The prerequisites of live modelling would be, attentive behaviour from the students, the positioning of the teacher they were used to, where they were meant to stand when they were doing that. On a more kind of operational level, knowing that every teacher had a visualizer with a little visualizer table, all those prerequisites were there. Whereas in another school, if those prerequisites aren't there, you have to think more carefully about how to build that up. And where you make that mistake and you don't, it's very difficult for teachers in a different part of that journey to feel successful, and you're almost setting them up to fail if you don't cater for those prerequisites. So when we think about designing a CPD, it has to be really carefully done, taking into consideration the particular needs and context of a school. Having said that, I wouldn't lower my expectations, and that's a really easy thing to do if we're trying to cater for the different points in a journey of a school. So, for example, I would not expect a staff body in any school to be able to embed a basic behavioural routine if that is something we've all said, hey, it needs attention. I would not expect, so I mean, I hate to get into the argument on slant, but that is something that we've we've embedded across our schools, but I wouldn't have said in any school, in any of our schools, regardless of their point in their journey, hey, you're not in a place to be able to do that. Because for me, that is such a basic strategy. It could have been any strategy really, but the outcome was achieving a level of attention and pro-social behaviours that we were trying to achieve that we believe every child is capable of, whatever their school and context of that school. So have a basic kind of level of expectation that we can expect regardless of the school, but don't blanket apply every strategy because that might not work either.
Okay, yeah, I think that kind of plays a part in kind of, because last week, sorry, I had a session on culture by design, and it was on the intentional approaches to shape behavior and drive accountability. And I do feel like in that conversation, loads of stuff kind of came up, but one of them was obviously you want positive behavior support. You want to set the standards across your school. You want to be driven by data, and I feel like you've mentioned some of this stuff as well. And I do think that one thing is obviously you want to be as a leader, you want to be leading that cultural change, but obviously as someone that leads like 3 different schools, you want to lead the cultural change, but you want to be obviously how should I say, more specific to what that particular school needs in their journey. Do you ever look back at, let's say, for example, you look at Forest Gate now, do you ever look back at, let's say Cumberland now, and you're like, okay, this school is 2 years behind Forest Gate, or this is exactly where they are, and this is what they need to do to get to there, and you kind of see the same journey? And is it always, I guess my question is it always clear cut? Like, is it always smooth sailing, or is there sometimes bumps in the road like that you didn't expect because like Forest Gate might have a completely different culture to, let's say, Cumberland, for example?
There's always bumps in the road, Omar, you know that. It's never ever smooth sailing, but what I would say is you're constantly learning from the mistakes that you make, and like Cumberland had the benefit of hindsight from Forest Gate, which was great, and also a fantastic team who led that change, and I had the pleasure of kind of being a part of that on the side, and like the things that we embedded at Forest Gate, we were able to reflect and be like, you know what, we do it differently. If we were to do it again, we'd do it differently, and we were able to apply those kind of lessons from hindsight at Cumberland. You're saying 2 years. Cumberland has caught up with Forest Gate, and they are very, very close. So Forest Gate should be scared, and I am a little bit, but conflicted because I'm invested in Cumberland as well. But it's an improvement journey, and I think what makes the difference is recognizing that where we make those errors, recognizing those errors in implementation, and being like, okay, you know what, we did it wrong there, or it could have been better there. How can we fix that and get the right people on the right bus to make those changes in a different context?
Yeah. So do you, this question, I mean, I think I know the answer to it, to be honest, but my question is, do you revisit teaching and learning like CPD, ones that you've gone through before? I'm guessing the answer will be yes. And so the question really is how do you do this without teachers feeling like, oh, it's this session again, like I've been through this before, like I know this already?
Yeah, so we do. It's important to revisit it. We've sequenced the CPD program like a curriculum. So, I mentioned the half an hour short, sharp sessions every other week. They're like lessons, aren't they? They're focused on something really specific. So that's your core knowledge that we've identified over the course of a half term, a term, a year. I've applied principles of a curriculum in this CPD program. So we've identified core knowledge. So that would include things like the behavioural instructional routines that I mentioned. It would include things like we've got a huge focus on shed loads of practice or independent practice, what that looks like within a subject. Once you've identified those components of core knowledge, like in any curriculum, you're meant to sequence and revisit that. And so our program tries to achieve that principle. We sequence certain strategies or components of our teaching, and we revisit that. over time, but in a different forum. So if I've done a really basic session on cold call, like I mentioned, I might revisit that later on as a part of another strategy, which cold call is needed for, but I know that I'm revisiting the expectations of a cold call. I've looked hard at how we've sequenced that. And, I look at it like a midterm plan where I've built up that knowledge within a half term and in a term, leaving space for tackling emerging needs as well, because it's important to be reactive as well as kind of deliberately plan ahead. And then the last thing that I say, the fourth component of that is personalizing it. So I might not necessarily do loads of work on cold calling at Forest Gate because I know that's an embedded strategy, but I will really hit home with that at UTCN, for example, because it might be a lot newer to them, establishing those basics. So once I've kind of established those core curriculum principles as part of my CPD curriculum, I've got my teaching and learning hype men, my influencers, who will go out and capture great examples, give those nudges to their teams, celebrate success early and often, pick up issues early and often, and tackle them. They're helping me embed that practice, which I mentioned was a really key and a high frequency error, the hardest to achieve in a school, because we get busy with loads of different things. But in doing that, those captures that I mentioned, what they're doing is they're not just sharing great videos and saying, hey, aren't we amazing? Aren't we great? But they're very intelligently picking out the components of what makes it good. So it's really quite specific. And those are granular things that we would provide feedback on. So, for example, we've got an I Love How series. I love how Omer stands at the front and center of the classroom and calls for the attention of the class with a strong voice. I love how Omer is being seen looking. So they're picking out really specific or concrete granular things that make that this. It's quite developmental in doing so, but it also means in doing that task, that activity itself, is practicing how to give really good granular feedback. And it means when we do want to step in and perfect practice that might be slightly imperfect, we can do so in a meaningful way. And that's where we have live coaching, which is another really key part of our strategy to embed practice. And I know you've had a session on live coaching, but essentially we applied the principles of hospital residency, which I read in Get Better Faster by Paul Bambrick Santoyo, which I highly recommend if listeners haven't read it. And I only wished I'd read it as a mentor or when I was training back in the day, because it would have made me a much more better practitioner, faster. And what he does is he likens hospital residency performing their first surgeries to what we might do in the classroom. And he mentions like two premises that they base their work on. Premise number one, a patient's life is of the utmost importance in medical care. So a teaching doctor, they can keep that sacred, but whilst also training residents by simply stepping in when needed. And the second premise is of accelerated development. So by stepping in and coaching in the moment, the experienced doctors are able to deliver more feedback to their residents, and the residents get better faster. They fix their mistakes, they become experts quickly. And I guess on the operating table, that's not a luxury, but a necessity. And what Bambrick Santoyo says is, what if we in teaching had to honour those same two premises of residency? And it ends up looking really similar, actually. So premise number one, actually, a student's life is of the utmost importance. And, we can keep that sacred whilst also training our teachers by stepping in when needed. And the second premise remains the same, our accelerated development. By stepping in and coaching in the moment, we're able to deliver more feedback to our teachers. Our teachers are able to get better faster. They can fix their mistakes. They become experts quickly. And surely when it comes to students learning, it's not a luxury, but a necessity. So we've worked really hard on, understanding these premises, these ideas. We quote that famous quote from Dylan William: "Every teacher needs to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better." And it is this spirit by which we live coach. And we've worked hard to build a culture where people believe, this teacher is really invested in my development and they're here to support me, and we're celebrating each other. We're eliciting the brilliance in each other by doing so.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to say that Edexcels new student-centered French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs catered to the needs of all learners regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent, accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills through inclusive and relatable content. So first thing, I was actually going to ask the question about how so beforehand you mentioned that the way you know that you ran a good CPD session is how well it's implemented. And I was going to ask, how do you know how well it's implemented? But I think you've kind of answered that with live coaching. Now, as you said, we did actually speak about live coaching before, and it was slightly controversial. This was with Shoff when he joined the show. Could you just quickly run through how live coaching works?
Yeah, so when you see something that, right, for example, let me paint a scenario for you, Omar. Yeah, I walk into your classroom, you're teaching, you're a great teacher, Omar, and I notice, right, Monday period 1, you are at your computer getting your lesson up. The kids have come in and they're slightly rowdy. They're just chatting. They're sitting down. And from your computer, I notice, having walked into your lesson, you call for their attention. You say, right, guys, settle down. Take a seat. I'm about to do the register. And I notice after you said that, the students in your class kind of half settle down. The ones at the front, they sit down and they're listening, but there's a few at the back who have carried on talking. One's still kind of wandering around at the back. And I think as the observer here, I think, you know what, if Omar just did one tiny thing, one tiny change in his practice there, you would have achieved what you wanted to achieve there. And all you had to do, I notice as the observer, is kind of move from behind your computer screen to the front center of your class, and with a strong voice call for their attention. I know if you just did that tiny tweak in your practice, the whole class would have paid attention straight away. You would have, in a couple of seconds, as opposed to however many minutes it was taking you in that moment. Okay, so I've got two options there. I could either make a note of it on my clipboard or in my book or a mental note, and then figure out a time when both of us are free to give you that feedback retrospectively. Okay, that could be, period 7 later on that day, because that's when we're free, or even the next day. And what would happen is you, Omar, would carry on, perhaps continuing in that practice every lesson thereafter. Okay, so calling for their attention, taking a bit more time, realizing they're not listening, then moving yourself, having a go at a kid, giving them a reminder, whatever it is. And you would do that period 2 in the beginning of the lesson, period 3, period 4, all the way up until period 7, until it's becoming quite an embedded part of your practice, a habit, if you like, a bad one. Or what I could do, my second option, is tell you there and then, okay, stepping in the moment. So I could come to you and really quickly say, hey, Omar, why don't you try that again by standing at the front center of your class and use a strong voice. And then you'd say to me, great idea, miss, let me have a go at that. And you'd move from your computer, go to the front center of your classroom, and in a strong voice call for the attention of the class. And then you will notice in that moment that class pay attention very quickly to you. Suddenly you feel the success of your adjusted practice. And because you feel that success, because you've seen the improvement in your adjusted practice, now you are more likely to call for attention in that way as opposed to your previous way every lesson thereafter, until by the end of the day it's become a habit, and it's a much better one than what you previously did. So that's essentially how the premise of live coaching. Now, that feedback to you, Omar, didn't suggest to you and shouldn't suggest to you that you're a terrible teacher and you should think about another day job. It tells you that, hey, it's a tiny aspect of your practice that actually you probably should be a little bit more attuned to and conscious of, and now you are, and it's not a big deal. And if we've got the culture right in our school, and that's a constant, we're striving for that all the time, me telling you that actually Thahmina's invested in my development here, and I know that I will be better as a result of it, even in that tiny aspect of my practice. So that's essentially life coaching, or the idea, or the kind of the spirit behind life coaching. And we provide lots of training on how to do that really well. So in the book that it's based on, they go over the criteria of effective kind of action steps, they call it. So the three that they give the criteria on, and this is what we base a lot of our training on. And I think it's applicable to any kind of feedback, whether it's live coaching, whether it's feedback in a line management meeting, whether it's feedback after a lesson observation, which we don't do anymore. Whatever it is, I think it's quite applicable. And those three are: is that feedback, is it observable and practicable? Is it the highest leverage action you could ask that teacher to perform? So I wouldn't, for example, say to you, Omer, your learning objectives are completely wrong. That would derail your whole lesson. I've picked the highest leverage thing in that moment, you moving from your teacher desk to the middle, the front center of your classroom, as the highest leverage thing that's going to move you on. And the third criteria, is it bite-sized enough that the teacher could accomplish it in a week? And I know you could do that with me not there, etc. And so so we do a lot of training around, does your feedback meet that criteria? Because if it doesn't, it's probably not the best. It could be better. And then we've got like several strategies that range from least invasive, so like a whisper with the teacher, to slightly more, where you might want to step in completely and model a skill or a technique, obviously. And again, we discuss and we practice which strategies we would apply to which kind of teacher, practice, context, situation. And that is a spinning plate. It is every week at every level, as often as we can, because we're determined to get the quality of feedback right. And it's really important to establish that.
Thank you for that. I just want to so last time, again, when this was discussed, there was a few people that saying they feel like if someone comes into your classroom and you're a teacher, they feel like it might belittle the teacher in that particular circumstance. What would you say to those people? Because I mean, I think you've kind of cleared it up a little bit, but what would you say to the people that said that?
Well, I think number one, starting off with that premise, like if you believe that, if you've bought into or you agree that, you know what, a student's learning is of the utmost importance, and my accelerated development, I need to get better faster, not because I'm not good enough, but because I can be even better. Our actions need to emulate that. So that's number one. I always go back to that premise. Where live coaching is done well, to the students, it should look like team teaching. Okay. And to the teacher who is being live coached, they believe that this person is genuinely invested in my development. They're eliciting the brilliance within me, and they want me to get better. And for it to be done well, both parties do well. So as a coach, right, it's that it's a really awkward thing to do if those conditions aren't correct. It's really difficult. And when we first did it across our schools, and I remember having those feelings, I didn't want to step in because I was really worried about the teacher feeling undermined. I didn't want to upset them like that, even though I believed in the spirit behind what we were doing. I believed in those premises. But from the teacher point of view, again, number one, they might feel undermined, fine. But if they received it in the spirit with which it was intended, it all becomes so much easier. So Omer, if you said to me, if you live coached me and said, hey, Thahmina, did you notice you a little bit more invasive, yeah? So you jumped into my lesson and you said, oh, miss, I noticed that you asked for silence for this next task, but some students are talking. My reaction to that is equally important here, right? So I could either be really awkward about it and think, oh my, he's trying to derail this lesson and he totally thinks I'm a rubbish teacher and he's completely undermined me. And my reaction would really show that. Or I could pick pick up on that cue from you, believing that you are invested in my development and you believe my students' learning is of the utmost importance. And I might react and say something like, oh, thank you so much, sir. I didn't notice that. And then attend to that, what you've just picked out. Okay. And to the students, that looks like team teaching to them. Two teachers helping each other out, teaching the class. But between us, me and you, we are both invested in those students learning. And between us, we've now made that teaching, my teaching and their learning slightly better in doing that. Now, that's the utopia here. That's what we want to achieve, right? But if your feedback to me was a bit rubbish, Omar, it wouldn't achieve that. And so I talk about spinning plates a lot. And on the side then, the training for you to give me good feedback like that is really important. And that's an ongoing endeavor at every level. But also the training of and building that culture of me genuinely believing and acting, my actions showing that you, hey, I get that. And you know what? I'm appreciating you stepping in, because as a teacher, my cognitive load is so high in that moment that I am going to miss out sometimes on a student not paying attention when I'm asked to pay attention or whatever it is. And I'm grateful for the teacher in the classroom who's picked up on that. And I've done a bit of I've gone back into a bad habit of mine. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because now I'm more conscious of it. That is what I want to achieve and what we're trying to constantly.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, I got one question myself, and I do have a question here in the comments from Tom. My question is, okay, let's say in that particular scenario, you're executive head teacher, okay, you're in charge of looking over 3 schools. I come into your classroom, I'm just the head of physics, right? And I say I live coach you. How would is that okay in that particular scenario? And how would you feel in that particular case?
What would you live coach on, Omar? It depends on what it is.
Let's say it was it's the same thing. It's the exact same scenario. Some students are chatting when you've told them to be silent, and I've said, "Oh, thank you very much, miss. Fantastic stuff going on here." But those students are still talking, and it's really important. You told them that they need to be working silently. Yeah, how would that be received, I guess?
In the same way that I said, because I'm going to bring it back to those same premises, right? A student's learning is of the utmost importance here, not my ego or my role and what that's attached to. And the second premise, accelerated development. However, I could be teaching for 2 years or 20 years. There are still mistakes that I'm making in my practice, and I need someone to point it out to me, especially if I'm so used to making certain habits that I've become really practiced at, which might not be the best in what I'm trying to achieve. I think sometimes in teaching we become it's in many ways, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it is quite an egotistical profession. We are the center of the classroom. We like to speak. We do like to hear the sound of our own voices. We do like to talk. And in some schools, the culture is such that if someone steps into your classroom, and I used to work in a school like this, you would look at them like, how very dare you? This is my space. You didn't ask me permission to do that. And actually, we do need to move ourselves from the center a little bit. It is about the students, and any space where students are learning, they are at the center, and we need to be in a space where we are able to receive that feedback, and that will make us better in our craft. I was reading this really interesting article the other day, very long article, but fascinating, called Personal Best by Atul Gawande. Where it talks about, top athletes and singers have coaches, and, should you? And it's basically from the point of view of a surgeon who's been doing the job for many years and who reached their peak, if you like, got really good at what they did. And they discuss actually they plateaued in their performance or their practice. They weren't getting any better after a number of years. And in teaching, it is kind of the same, isn't it? I think there's we plateau after the first 3 to 5 years, and actually this idea of continual improvement we need to look hard and honestly about how we are achieving that. Live coaching is a strategy to do that. It's not the strategy. I wouldn't, it's one of a number of things or layers in our trust that we utilize, and getting it right is I think it's worthy enough to invest in, because I've seen the impact that it's had across the schools that we've done it in for a few years now.
Yeah, I just want to bring you back to the question that Tom asked on the comments. It says, how do you ensure that the impact of live coaching is maintained when the coach has left the room?
So it's a good question. We've actually moved towards, so we tweak it and kind of try to perfect it every year. So next year, what we're doing, our deputy CEO has really aligned the follow through of what we're trying to achieve here. So every teacher will have a coach who will visit them. At the moment, it's kind of been a bit ad hoc, if you like. We walk in, we might live coach. They'll receive that feedback in their email. We use Google Forms. In real time they will receive it, which is good. You can act on it immediately, but no one will necessarily come back to see if you've improved that. Specifically, I will receive it on a general whole school forum, and I pick up on general trends, but we could be much more kind of granular in our follow through. So what we're now looking at is a system where, on a subject specific level, I will have an English specialist who is assigned to me as a coach, and they would visit me 1 week, live coach me, and they would come back and see if I have perfected that practice, achieved that action step that they provided me the following week and thereafter. And they're assigned to me for the term or the year, depending on emerging needs. And so that kind of securing success, that loop that we're trying to achieve, we're doing so on a much more meaningful level. Because number one, it's a loop. They're coming back and they're seeing if I've achieved that. And number two, they're a subject expert. So I know they're going to be able to give me feedback on my subject, and that's going to be really meaningful for me.
Yeah, that sounds very good. I'm going to move on away from the topic of live coaching now. My question is, what does, because obviously our whole kind of show is on embedded practice. So what does embedded practice mean in the context of teaching and learning, and why is it important?
In the context of teaching and learning, embedded practice means doing what you are meant to do, or doing what we say we do, all the time, every day, so that it is improving the outcomes of our students, which is why we're doing that thing. To achieve that is really, really difficult, because lots of other things get in the way, like a sudden national worldwide pandemic, or Ofsted suddenly coming in, or mock season where we're drowning under marking, impending deadlines. All of those things that we can't necessarily control do get in the way of keeping the main thing about the main thing, which is perfecting our practice in the classroom to impact the outcomes of our students. And so it's really important, right? And I've discussed kind of several ways to do that, but it is a bit of a spinning plates approach, because where you stop doing one of those things, something else falls down. So I've talked about designing your CPD, but affecting things on a structural level if you can. So that's one spinning plate, if you like. Where you're receiving data in the form of feedback, in the form of your lesson visits, in the form of those videos that your teaching and learning team are sharing with you, you're constantly using that data to inform your CPD that you've designed, right? That's a spinning plate. If you stop doing that, that's the quality of the design of your CPD will be affected. The other spinning plate I mentioned was your hype men team. You're assembling that teaching and learning influencer group who will capture the great practice, but also pick up on things that aren't quite working and do something about it. Okay, if they stop doing those things, that's going to affect embedding practice. That's going to affect, therefore, the design of your CPD. You can't, as the person leading it, do those things yourself at all. It's absolutely impossible. Your hype men, your team, are able to do that for you because they've got leverage in their own teams. They've got influence, and they can be in lots of places at once. You stop doing that, things fall down. Okay. The training on good feedback I mentioned today, the making sure it's bite-sized, concrete, observable, highest leverage. If I don't train my team who are providing that coaching or that feedback on those aspects, on the criteria that makes feedback meaningful, they will end up giving rubbish feedback. They will end up giving feedback that is not bite-sized, not actionable, not the highest leverage. As a result of that, bad feeling will incur. People will be demotivated. They will be feeling left disillusioned, not buy into the spirit through which we're trying to do these things. Their practice won't become better as a result of it. So you can see how that spinning plate is really important, the training on the how. Monitoring. So I haven't spoken about monitoring, but all of this kind of feedback, what you're getting from your team, the embedding practice, the training on the how, all of that is data for you if you are leading teaching and learning. That data you are monitoring constantly because you're using that data to evaluate and act on. So, for example, mid-year, I'll give you an example. After the pandemic, after those 2 lockdowns, we came back. Live feedback is a key strategy we use across our schools, giving feedback in the moment in the classroom, feedback that is pegged to the curriculum that we've established for our students. We don't take books home retrospectively, Mark. We do it in the moment in class. It was quite well established at Forest Gate. I wasn't really worried about it. When we came back after the lockdowns, I suddenly noticed that none of our teachers were doing it, simply because we were completely out of practice. It wasn't part of our habit, our routines anymore. And I quickly realized, actually, we need to retrain. We need to get back and establish those habits again. So being able to have that freedom and that structure where we can evaluate and act quickly with emerging needs is another spinning plate. But I can't do that if I don't have the data to inform my acting quickly on that. So all of those things, I think I've listed about 6 there. Those are spinning plates. It's a constant endeavor to achieve. And if one drops, the others will be impacted. And so doing that, it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? But it's about identifying all your touch points through which you can do that. And so I'll mention that and then I'll stop. So what do I mean by touch points? Touch points are opportunities in your week, days, months, half terms, whatever it is, where you can communicate and affect change and culture and expectations at scale. Okay, so I always do this exercise where I kind of talk about leading, teaching and learning. How many touch points can you identify in your school where you can affect change like that or communicate what you expect? I can list about 15 in one school, for example. You've got things like you might have a briefing, staff briefing, first thing on a Monday morning. That's a touch point for you to affect change or establish those expectations or give those nudges that we mentioned earlier. You've got department meetings, you've got leadership group meetings, you've got middle leader meetings, you've got mentor meetings, all of those kind of forums. You can establish standard items where you're getting people to talk about the right things. You've got nudge emails. I mentioned those WhatsApp groups. That's another touch point. If you've got kind of certain publications, teaching and learning publications, I know lots of schools have that. That's a touch point. Staff bulletins, a touch point. A midweek email, that's a touch point. There's loads that if you identified correctly and you deliberately planned for those are all forums through which you can spin those plates and not run the risk of dropping one of them and then other things being affected.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've just gone slightly over. I was actually going to ask a question to say, can a hype man be too hyped? But I'll skip past that for now.
Never, Omer. Not this right.
Thank you very much for the discussion today. We've gone over so many things. We went over culture, we went over shared language, we went over aligned vision, we went over Twilight's We've gone over motivation for teachers and for students. And I just want to say thank you, everyone that's come and joined. Thank you, Thahmina, for joining the conversation. And I do wish you guys a very good end to your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.